The popular young rock singer Jimi Hendrix died today in London.
They say Jimi Hendrix lived like a comet, blazing across the sky, unforgettable, brilliant, and doomed to burn out. But that's the version the music industry likes to tell. A tragic genius.
I don't know what's happening. I was so exhausted,
Yeah.
It was like what do you call those things? Nervous breakdown?
A beautiful waste. A soul that burned too hot. It sounds poetic, doesn't it? But what if the truth is much simpler and much darker? What if Jimi Hendrix didn't burn out on his own? What if he was drained? From the moment Hendrix landed in London with his upside-down guitar and his impossible talent, he wasn't treated like a human being, but like a resource. And resources are meant to be extracted, used, exhausted, profited from. The Jimi Hendrix experience wasn't just a band. It was a product, a brand, a carefully engineered spectacle designed to generate maximum hype and maximum revenue. With Hendrix at the center, electrified, sexualized, and pushed beyond the limits of what a body and mind can survive. The myth says Jimi was free, a cosmic traveler, a psychedelic prophet. But the truth is that Jimi Hendrix was trapped, caught between predatory contracts, aggressive managers, racial expectations, and the crushing demand to perform every single night like he was calling lightning out of the sky.
These parent strands here, each one stands for a vibration. They're all supposed to be good. But oh, there goes a strand there.
This wasn't freedom, it was ownership. And it is here in this tension between the artist and the machinery that the Jimi Hendrix experience began to fracture. Because no human being, no matter how brilliant, can remain a brand forever. Tonight we're telling the story they tried to bury. Welcome to Shadows of Rock, where legends live loud, even in silence. We tell the untold stories, the hidden struggles, and the raw truth behind the icons who shaped rock history. This is Shadows of Rock. The light fades, the music never does. Chapter 1. The Spark in London Smoke. London, 1966. A place where rock was shifting. Mod clubs spilled tweed-jacketed boys into the street. The Beatles had moved from pop dreams into psychedelic experimentation. The blues scene simmered underground. And into this came a skinny guitarist from Seattle. Unknown, soft-spoken, shy to the point of disappearing. Jimi didn't look like a god yet. He looked tired. He had been living gig to gig in New York, sleeping on couches, playing backup for Little Richard, the Isley Brothers, always the side man, always in the shadows. Then came Chaz Chandler, former bassist of the Animals. He saw Jimi not as a musician, but as a project, a star waiting to be molded. Chandler brought him to London, repackaged him, renamed him, restyled him. This was the birth of the Jimi Hendrix experience. Noel Redding on bass, chosen not because he played bass, but because he had the look. Mitch Mitchell on drums, jazzy, fast, restless. But make no mistake, this was never a band. This was a stage built for one man. From the beginning, Jimi was told what he needed to be. More outrageous, more sexual, more explosive. The industry didn't want the quiet, thoughtful man who listened to Curtis Mayfield and spoke softly about the universe. They wanted the spectacle, the flames, the hips, the wild eyes, the black exotic genius the white rock audience could gasp at. So Jimi gave them what they demanded. He played like lightning was trapped inside his veins. He smashed guitars. He set them on fire. He made sound into something dangerous. Crowds screamed. Critics worshipped. The machine smiled, but look closer at photos from that era. The ones where he's not performing. Jimi's eyes are distant, uncertain, already exhausted. Because from the very start, The man and the myth were splitting apart, and only one of them was allowed to survive. I'm the one that's got to die when it's time for me to die, so let me live my life the way I want to. Jimi Hendrix. The tragedy is that he never got to. The machinery had already begun turning. Chapter 2. The persona that ate the man. As the experience exploded across Europe and America, the Hendrix persona took on a life of its own. The music press called him wild, tribal, savage talent. They sold him as primitive magic wearing a military jacket, racist, dehumanizing, profitable. Audiences didn't want to understand Hendrix, they wanted to consume him. Meanwhile, Jimi, the real Jimi, was deeply introspective. He spoke about dreams, galaxies, energy, emotion. He didn't want to shock people. He wanted to connect. But connection doesn't sell records. Spectacle does. So managers and promoters pushed. More shows, more tours, more interviews, more Hendrix moments. By 1968, Hendrix had performed over 500 shows in 2 years. That pace is not human. The fatigue seeped in first, then the anxiety, then the pills, then the irritation with those closest to him. Noel Redding noticed it early. Jimi was being stretched too thin. We were just running, always running. Mitch Mitchell said it more bluntly. We were killing him. But stopping was not allowed. Contracts were layered, binding, predatory. Jimi owed albums. He owed performances. He owed interviews. He owed himself. And every time he tried to slow down, someone reminded him, "You're lucky to be famous. You're lucky to be paid. You're lucky to be here at all." Lucky. As though his genius was charity. As though his exhaustion was ungrateful. So he kept going. He kept performing the myth, the cosmic wild man. And each night the audience cheered, not realizing they were watching a man slowly being erased. At the end of the day, Jimi would sit alone, guitar on his lap, staring at nothing. He told a friend, "Sometimes I feel like I'm being eaten alive." He wasn't wrong. He just hadn't seen the teeth yet. Chapter 3. The contract that chained the Comet. By 1968, Jimi Hendrix was the most electrifying guitarist alive. But behind the roaring crowds and the glittering stage jackets was a truth almost no one knew. Jimi Hendrix was broke. Not spent too much money, broke. Legally trapped, broke. Before London, before fame, before the experience. Hendrix had signed a contract in a New York coffee house with a man named Ed Chalpin of PPX Enterprises. A cheap deal, worthless on paper. Something Hendrix barely remembered. But once Hendrix became valuable, that paper became a weapon. Chalpin resurfaced. He sued. He claimed ownership of Hendrix's music, not just royalties, not just tracks, his music, his voice, his future output. Every note made under the Jimi Hendrix Experience was suddenly part of a legal battlefield, one that Jimi could not escape. Chaz Chandler tried to shield him. Managers argued. Labels negotiated. Deals were made behind closed doors, and every one of those deals had one thing in common: more work, more albums, more touring. Jimi didn't own his sound. He didn't own the master tapes. He didn't even own the stage name which the world now worshipped. So when people say, "Why didn't he just stop touring?" he literally couldn't. Stopping meant breach. Breach meant lawsuits. Lawsuits meant seizures. His music, his guitars, his everything. The machine had him by the throat. Noel Redding remembered the shift. It wasn't fun anymore. There were always lawyers around. Everyone was tense. Everyone was tired. This is when the fissures inside the band widened. Noel felt disrespected, overshadowed, unappreciated. Mitch felt like they were sprinting toward a cliff with no brakes. Chaz Chandler saw Jimi slipping into exhaustion and frustration. And Jimi? He began to withdraw. He stopped joking, stopped talking, stopped trusting. He once told a journalist, "I feel like I've been locked inside someone else's dream." Because the Jimi Hendrix experience was no longer about expression, it was about fulfillment of contracts, expectations, obligations, profit quotas. The guitar was still on fire, but the man holding it was burning down. And the sad truth, this was only the beginning of the unraveling. Chapter 4. Electric Churches and Empty Rooms. This is where the story shifts. This is where Jimi tries to break free. After the relentless touring and contractual chaos, Hendrix began searching for something real, something untouched by managers and promoters. He became obsessed with the idea of a new sound, something cosmic, freeform, experimental. A sound that didn't have to dance for applause. He called it electric church, music as spirituality, music as liberation, music as truth. But the world didn't want Jimi Hendrix to evolve. They wanted the wild man with the flaming guitar, the spectacle, the show. So when Jimi began taking creative control, when he started extending solos, changing arrangements, exploring jazz influences, the audiences became restless. Noel Redding especially. He grew frustrated. He pushed back. He wanted structured songs, radio hits, rehearsed parts. The divide between Hendrix and Redding became a canyon. One night, after a particularly tense studio session, Redding walked out and never came back. The Jimi Hendrix experience, as the world knew it, was over. But here's the part that hits hardest: almost nobody noticed. The industry didn't care about the band. They didn't even care about the music. They cared about the brand. So tours continued, shows continued, festivals continued, Jimi on stage, backed by whoever was available. To the audience, nothing had changed, but to Jimi, everything had. He had lost the chemistry, the brotherhood, the laughter, the messy human center of the fire. Now he stood alone under the spotlight, just a symbol, a product, a performance. Even surrounded by thousands, he looked lonely. A journalist who met him backstage said he was surrounded by people, but he moved like a ghost, like someone who had already begun to leave. This is the midpoint, the place where the story could have turned, but instead, the pressure increased, the touring intensified, the pills multiplied, and something began to fracture in him that would not heal. What most people don't know is this: Jimi Hendrix tried to quit being Jimi Hendrix, and the world would not let him. Understood. We descend now into the final act, where exhaustion becomes collapse, and collapse becomes tragedy. Chapter 5. The Body That Couldn't Hold the Fire. By late 1969, the cracks in Hendrix's life were no longer invisible. Jimi's schedule was brutal. Night after night on stage, hotel rooms that blurred into each other, endless travel, endless noise, endless hands reaching for him. He was praised everywhere, yet known by no one. He was worshipped, yet listened to by almost nobody. At first, Jimi turned to stimulants, trying to stay awake, stay sharp, stay Hendrix. But what goes up must come down. So the downers came too: sleeping pills, painkillers, amphetamines, red wine, champagne, tunals, not for excitement, not for escape, for silence. Friends remember him nodding off mid-sentence. Others recall him pacing rooms restlessly, strung out, anxious, mumbling about needing peace. One night, backstage, Jimi pulled a friend aside and said, "I don't feel alive unless I'm playing. And I don't feel alive when I am." The body that could once summon lightning on command was now struggling to keep up. His fingers shook, his voice thinned, his energy flickered in and out like a dying neon bulb. But still, the shows continued. Because they had to. Every night on stage paid off another legal pressure. Every contract clause came with a performance attached. Every handshake deal was another chain on his ankles. No matter how broken he became, the machine demanded the show go on. Meanwhile, the world thought he was thriving. The headlines read, "Hendrix conquers Woodstock. Hendrix reinventing rock again. Hendrix unstoppable." But watch closely at that famous Woodstock performance. Yes, it is transcendent. Yes, he turns the guitar into a voice of grief, war, rebellion, soul. But notice his shoulders. They slump. They sag. He's playing like his body weighs more than it should. That wasn't an artistic choice. That was fatigue. Bone-deep fatigue. After the show, he slept for nearly 2 days, yet before he could recover, he was booked for another tour, another interview, another city, another room where everyone wanted something from him. His body was a lantern burning low, and nobody stopped to refill the oil. Chapter 6. Band of Gypsys. The last attempt at freedom. In late 1969, Jimi tried something radical. He tried to reclaim his life. He formed a new Band of Gypsys, with Billy Cox on bass and Buddy Miles on drums. This wasn't about fame anymore. It wasn't about spectacle. It wasn't about being Hendrix TM. It was about brotherhood. Black musicians playing for healing, playing for soul, playing for each other. Noel Redding was gone. Mitch Mitchell was drifting. Chaz Chandler had stepped away. Managers circled like vultures, so Jimi returned to the people who knew him before he was a myth. For a brief window, the music changed. Warm, groove-based, funk-driven, alive. The Band of Gypsys Live album is not the sound of a star. It is the sound of a man trying to come home. But the industry had other plans. Remember the PPX contract? One of the conditions to settle that lawsuit was Hendrix must deliver another album immediately. The Band of Gypsys record became that album, released not as art, but as repayment. Even his escape had been turned into currency. Then came the Fillmore East show, New Year's Eve 1969. Jimi walked on stage exhausted, medicated, pressured, and watched. Buddy Miles played heavy, loud, dominant. Billy Cox tried to anchor the storm. Jimi tried to be present, but he was fading. Mid-show, Hendrix froze, confused, disoriented, unable to continue. He left the stage while the crowd watched in stunned silence. The press called it a meltdown, a failure, a disaster. But it wasn't failure. It was a man collapsing under a weight no human was meant to carry. Shortly after, the Band of Gypsys dissolved. Not because the music failed, but because freedom was not allowed. The machine didn't want Jimi the man. The machine wanted the brand, and the brand was already dying. Chapter 7. The Last Nights. Silence at the end of the storm. Europe, 1970. Jimi is quieter now. He speaks softly, moves slowly, avoids cameras when he can. He tells friends he's tired, not in the way a person gets tired after a show, in the way a soul gets tired after being lived by everyone but itself. On September 17th, he spends the evening with Monica Dannemann in London. They talk about leaving the music industry entirely. Jimi tells her, "I need peace. Just for a little while. I need time to breathe." He had said this many times before. No one had ever listened. They fall asleep. In the early hours of September 18th, Jimi Hendrix takes sleeping pills. Too many. Not to get high, not to escape, not to die, but to rest, to silence the storm for one night. He never wakes up. The newspapers called it an overdose, another rock casualty, wild man gone too far. But the truth is quieter. Jimi Hendrix died of exhaustion. exhaustion of the body, exhaustion of the heart, exhaustion of being a product instead of a person. He was 27. The world cried, but the industry didn't pause. Within 24 hours, labels collected masters, managers negotiated rights, producers discussed reissues. Even in death, his body of work was harvested. The Comet didn't burn out. It was drained dry. Chapter 8. Legacy. The man behind the myth. Today, we remember Hendrix as a god, the guitar saint, the psychedelic poet, the man who made sound bleed color. But gods are easy to worship because they are not human. Jimi Hendrix was human. He laughed quietly. He doubted himself often. He wanted love, not spotlight. He wanted expression, not performance. And he wanted freedom, more than anything. But the world loved the dream of Hendrix more than the man. And when a person becomes a dream, the world believes it has the right to own them. So what remains? A lesson, a warning, a mirror held up to the way we treat our geniuses. We demand they give us everything. We call their exhaustion weakness. We glorify their suffering as the price of greatness. And when they fall, we mourn them. But we never change. Jimi Hendrix's legacy is not just the records, not just the solos, not just the stages he scorched into eternity. His legacy is this truth. Genius should not cost a life, because art is not born from endless sacrifice. It is born from being allowed to live. And Jimi Hendrix, for all his brilliance, was never allowed that. He lit the world on fire, and the world never let him rest. The story of the Jimi Hendrix experience is not just the story of a band, it is the story of a system that takes the brightest souls and convinces them they owe the world more than they owe themselves. Jimi Hendrix did not die because he was reckless. He died because he was tired, and because the world valued his fire more than his life. If you felt something tonight, if you've seen past the posters and the legend and glimpsed the quiet human being behind them, then carry that with you. Hold space for the artists who are still here, the ones still burning, still giving, still being asked for more. Tell me in the comments, what is the one Hendrix performance or song that lives in your bones, the one that made you feel something you couldn't explain? And if this story moved you, wait until you see how another legend, Jim Morrison, followed a nearly identical path, from myth to machine to collapse. Tap here to watch how Jim Morrison's final night sealed his tragic fate, the truth you've never heard because the music never dies. But sometimes the musician does, and that is the tragedy we must never forget.